Hello everyone, before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. The ballroom at the Ritz-Carlton glowed like a cathedral built for money. Chandeliers dripped gold. Crystal glasses hummed softly every time silverware touched porcelain. And in the middle of that curated perfection, under bouquets of white roses tall as small trees, sat a woman whose very presence made the air shift. Naomi Cole. Satin gold dress. Shoulders straight. Eyes calm, unreadable. The kind of calm that doesn't come from arrogance, but from a lifetime of storms survived. The moment she placed her hand on the linen tablecloth, the conversations around her didn't just pause. They recoiled. Across from her, the billionaire's wife, Veronica Stanfield, froze mid-sip of champagne, her eyes widening as if she just spotted an insect on the dinner plate. Then the mask cracked. Her jaw dropped. And the shrill, crystalline voice that had charmed every charity board in the city sliced through the room. Who the hell allowed her to sit here? The last word was sharp enough to draw blood. Forks halted in midair. The quartet faltered on a note. Even the waitstaff froze, like statues polished for an audience that suddenly wasn't breathing. A young server stepped forward, holding a handheld payment terminal, still assuming Naomi was just another guest who'd wandered into the wrong universe. "Ma'am, if this is..." Veronica stabbed a manicured finger toward Naomi, her face flushing with the thrill of public dominance. "No. No, absolutely not. This table is reserved for principal donors and executive families. Not," she waved her hand dismissively, as if clearing smoke. "Whoever this is." A ripple ran through the ballroom. Not a whisper. Not yet. Just the tightening of posture, the small adjustments of people preparing to enjoy someone else's humiliation. Charles Stanfield, the billionaire himself, didn't shout. He didn't need to. His authority was a blade dipped in cold water. "This is inappropriate," he said, voice low but cutting. "Young woman, I believe you're at the wrong table. Security will escort you." Naomi didn't move. Not a flinch. Not a blink. Not a breath out of place. She simply looked at Charles, then at Veronica, her posture as pristine as the marble beneath her feet. Her expression didn't harden, it clarified. Like glass being tempered by sudden heat. A few tables away, phones began to rise. Quietly. Discreetly. Predators waking. Veronica leaned in, her voice loud enough to ensure the entire left wing of the ballroom heard every syllable. "This is the Ritz-Carlton, sweetheart. People don't just sit wherever they want. Especially not," she paused, eyes narrowing. "Especially not the help." A laughter, not many, just 3 or 4, cracked through the silence like brittle bones snapping. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to Naomi. The server shifted nervously beside Naomi, still unsure whether to ask her to pay for a drink she didn't order or to step back. His hand trembled around the scanner. Veronica snatched a breath, preparing for the final blow, the one meant to bury Naomi beneath an avalanche of class and cruelty. "You must have taken a wrong turn from the staff corridor. If someone doesn't remove you from my table this instant, I will." But she didn't finish. Because something changed. Not in the lights. Not in the music. In Naomi. It wasn't anger. It wasn't shame. It wasn't fear. It was the stillness before a seismic shift. Her chin rose a single inch. Her gaze lifted. Her presence, quiet, elegant, razor-sharp, expanded across the table like a tide no one saw coming. And in that moment, people began to realize. This woman did not look misplaced. She looked misjudged. The ballroom held its breath. And the night that would collapse a $9 billion empire began with one simple, devastating thing. Naomi Cole finally decided to speak. Silence held the ballroom in a tight, breathless grip. Not the polite hush of a high society pause, but the heavy, metallic quiet that follows a sudden shift in gravity when everyone realizes the room is no longer safe for arrogance. Naomi Cole hadn't moved more than an inch, yet the entire energy around the table felt altered. Veronica sensed it first. Her raised hand, still poised in accusation, seemed to tremble, just barely, as if her body knew something her pride refused to accept. The server stood frozen beside Naomi, clutching the payment device like a shield. His eyes darted between the billionaire's wife and the woman she tried to humiliate, unsure whose orbit he was standing in, whose world he had accidentally stepped into. But Naomi kept her eyes forward. Not on Veronica. Not on the husband shifting uncomfortably in his chair. Not on the crowd pretending to look elsewhere. She stared past them at the chandelier overhead, its crystals swaying gently as if the very air was adjusting to her presence. She inhaled once, steady, and exhaled with the precision of someone reclaiming a room without lifting her voice. A low murmur rippled through the guests as they exchanged glances, half curiosity, half dread. Someone whispered, "Why isn't she reacting?" Another answered, "Because she doesn't need to." The music had died, though no one remembered when the quartet stopped playing. Charles Stanfield leaned back ever so slightly, brow furrowing. For the first time, he seemed uncertain, like he'd misread the moment, or worse, misread the woman at the center of it. Veronica, desperate to recover control, let out a brittle laugh. "Well," she said, gesturing dismissively, "if she won't move, someone needs to remove her. This is supposed to be a dignified event." Dignified. The word landed with an irony so thick it bent the space around it. Naomi finally lowered her gaze. Slowly. Deliberately. Her eyes met the server's first, a silent release, a kindness in the middle of chaos. "You're fine," she murmured. The young man blinked, surprised, as if she'd freed him from a spotlight he didn't ask for. He stepped back instinctively, relieved yet uncertain where to stand now that she'd shifted the axis of the room. Then Naomi turned her attention toward Veronica, not confrontational, not cowering. Simply present. Poised. A presence that didn't ask for authority because it already possessed it. And the room began to sense it. The subtle straightening of shoulders. The slow lowering of phones. The collective breath drawn in not out of fear, but anticipation. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to Naomi. A nearby senator at the adjacent table cleared his throat. Perhaps, he ventured carefully, there's been a misunderstanding. Veronica shot him a glare sharp enough to slice marble. There's no misunderstanding. She doesn't belong at this table. Naomi's eyes flicked toward her, just a fraction, just enough. And the chandelier trembled. Because now, finally, people weren't looking at Veronica anymore. They were looking at her. At the woman who absorbed humiliation without folding. At the woman whose calm made their wealth feel flimsy. At the woman whose silence didn't signal weakness, it signaled warning. Charles tried again, softer this time. "Miss, please, this is a private seating arrangement. Surely you understand." Naomi tilted her head slightly, the faintest suggestion of a smile forming, not warm, not cruel, just knowing. As if she had already decided the fate of this room long before she walked into it. The air thickened. The tablecloth stilled. And somewhere deep in the ballroom, someone whispered the first truth of the night. "She doesn't look lost. She looks like she's waiting." And she was. Because Naomi Cole knew exactly what was coming next. And the Stanfields had no idea they had just invited the storm to sit at their table. Before anyone in that ballroom understood what they were witnessing, before the whispers and sideways glances turned into something heavier, Naomi Cole had already mapped the night in her mind. Not the humiliation that part belonged to the Stanfields, but the quiet unveiling of who she truly was. Most people in the room assumed she was alone. Invisible. An intruder in gold satin. But Naomi had never stepped into a room, not a boardroom, not a negotiation, not a battlefield of polished marble, without carrying the weight of where she came from. Chicago's South Side. Tiny apartment. 3 locks on the door. One grandmother who believed dignity was a form of armor. That same grandmother used to say, "Baby, the world won't open a door for you. So build your own house and let them knock." And Naomi did. At 42, she wasn't just a CEO. She was the architect of one of the most powerful private conglomerates in North America, Cole Meridian Holdings, a quiet giant with interests in clean tech infrastructure, data networks, aerospace manufacturing, and the hospitality sector. The kind of empire that didn't brag. It moved. And because it moved silently, most of the billionaires in this ballroom had no idea that Naomi wasn't just wealthy. She was inevitable. Tonight, she was at the Ritz-Carlton because Charles Stanfield had begged, politely, discreetly, through intermediaries, for a final meeting to secure a $9 billion capital infusion into his faltering conglomerate. To the public, Stanfield Global looked untouchable. To insiders, it was a crumbling cathedral built on debt and outdated assets. Only Naomi knew how close they were to collapse. She hadn't planned to reveal herself tonight. Her style was subtle, private, almost invisible. Her power was never loud until provoked. A soft breeze slipped through the ballroom vents, brushing her cheek. Naomi closed her eyes for a breath, remembering the moment everything changed for her 2 decades earlier, the day she walked into a bank with her first prototype for an energy stabilization grid. The loan officer didn't look up. Didn't read her pitch. Didn't even bother to hide the dismissal. "We don't fund ideas like yours," he'd said. "Ideas like yours. People like you." Funny how history echoes in different rooms. Naomi opened her eyes again, returning to the present, to Veronica Stanfield's glare, to Charles's tension, to the faint tremble of crystal chandeliers. A man at a nearby table whispered, "Someone should tell her who they're dealing with." His companion shook her head. They wouldn't believe it. Because the truth was unbelievable. Cole Meridian Holdings owned the data infrastructure powering half the East Coast. It held strategic contracts with the federal government. It controlled renewable energy fields across 6 states. It had liquid reserves larger than the GDP of small countries. And in a twist of irony that fate must have enjoyed, the ballroom they were standing in? The Ritz-Carlton Tower itself? Naomi's real estate arm owned 18% of the property. If she snapped her fingers, the building's financial heartbeat would skip. She didn't, of course. Power didn't need performance. It needed precision. In the corner of the room, her assistant, present but unnoticed, watched with steady confidence. They knew this version of Naomi. The one who didn't raise her voice because the world raised itself around her. Someone in the back muttered, "Why is she so calm?" Because Naomi Cole had learned long ago. The higher the room, the quieter the authority. And if the Stanfields had recognized the posture, the eyes, the stillness, they might have understood. Naomi wasn't out of place. She was the only person at that table who actually belonged there. But the Stanfields would discover that soon enough. Because tonight wasn't about ego. It wasn't even about insult. It was about truth. And Naomi Cole was done hiding hers. The Stanfields had built their empire on image, on marble floors, tailored smiles, and old money confidence polished so often it gleamed like armor. But underneath the glittering veneer, cracks had already begun to form. And tonight, beneath the chandeliers of the Ritz-Carlton, the fractures were ready to split wide open. Veronica Stanfield, the woman whose voice had sliced across the ballroom minutes earlier, was the crown jewel of that facade. Impeccably styled, flawlessly composed, and ruthlessly trained in the art of social dominance, she lived for nights like this. Nights where proximity to wealth felt like a throne. Nights where everyone watched her, envied her, deferred to her. To her, hierarchy wasn't a belief. It was oxygen. She had spent her life learning exactly how to weaponize a glance, a whisper, a tilt of her chin. And Naomi Cole, in Veronica's eyes, violated every rule of the invisible class code she worshipped. So Veronica doubled down. She straightened in her chair, lips tightening into a smirk as she studied Naomi again, slowly, coldly, with the entitlement of a queen surveying someone who trespassed onto royal soil. Across the table, Charles Stanfield shifted uncomfortably. He wasn't as loud as his wife, nor as theatrical, but his arrogance ran deeper, quiet, inherited, and dangerously fragile. For months he had been hiding the truth. Stanfield Global, the century-old titan of shipping, construction, and logistics, was drowning in debt. Tonight's gala wasn't just a social event. It was their lifeline. The $9 billion investment from Cole Meridian Holdings would rescue the family's empire from collapse, stabilize their credit lines, and silence the rumors that had begun trickling into the financial press. But Charles hadn't told Veronica the whole story. He hadn't told her they were weeks, maybe days, away from default. He hadn't told her the board was panicking. He hadn't told her Naomi Cole was not merely an investor, but the investor who could decide whether the Stanfield legacy lived or died. No, he hadn't told her any of that. Which meant Veronica believed she still ruled the room. At the adjacent table, their son, Preston Stanfield, leaned back lazily in his chair, swirling his drink with the sloppiness of a man who had never worked for anything he owned. He watched Naomi with a smug curl of his lip. "Mom's right," he muttered loud enough for nearby guests to hear. She probably wandered in. These events really should check badges more carefully. A couple stifled awkward laughs, unsure whether to agree or retreat. Power made people bold. Ignorance made them loud. Veronica continued her inspection, her voice dripping with false concern. "Charles, darling," she said, "do remind security why we keep the service staff at the perimeter. They're starting to believe the seating is democratic." The word democratic left her mouth like poison disguised as perfume. Charles shot her a warning look, but she ignored it completely. Her world was built on the assumption that nothing, no stranger, no mishap, no misstep, could threaten her place at the top. She didn't yet understand that the woman she was belittling was the only reason the Stanfield name still meant anything. Naomi observed them quietly, watching how the family operated. The arrogance wasn't new, it was generational. The entitlement wasn't personal, it was structural. But the cruelty? That was a choice. A very intentional choice. and choices had consequences. A guest whispered from across the room, "That's Veronica's specialty, corner someone until they break." But Naomi didn't break. She sat taller. The Stanfields didn't notice it, but others did: the slow shift of power, the recalibration of attention, the sense that the air around Naomi had grown sharper, more defined. Veronica gave a final disdainful chuckle. "People like you," she said softly, "should know your place." Naomi blinked once. Not out of shock, but out of certainty. Because she knew something Veronica didn't. This moment, their arrogance, their blindness, their cruelty, was the very thing that would collapse the Stanfield empire. And the countdown had already begun. It happened the moment the room thought Naomi would finally shrink. The moment Veronica leaned back with the smug triumph of someone who believed she had successfully put another woman in her place. The moment Charles exhaled, relieved, assuming the situation had been contained. But Naomi Cole was not something you contained. She was something you miscalculated. And the price for that mistake was about to be written in numbers the Stanfields couldn't afford. Naomi placed her hands gently on the tablecloth, no sudden movement, no dramatic gesture. Just a quiet, deliberate touch that drew the eye the way lightning pulls metal. The server beside her stiffened, still unsure whether to step forward or retreat. Veronica rolled her eyes dramatically. Preston let out a half-laugh, swirling the last of his drink. Then Naomi's phone buzzed. A single vibration. Barely audible, but somehow louder than the entire ballroom. Naomi lowered her gaze. The screen glowed softly beneath the chandeliers. "Alex, Chief Strategy Officer. Madam Cole, the $9 billion authorization package is finalized. Board approval unanimous. We are ready on your word." She felt more than heard the shift in the air. The universe had impeccable timing. She sat back, and the entire table seemed to inch deeper into silence, like the marble beneath them sensed something was about to break. Veronica scoffed. "Oh look," she said loudly, "she's checking her phone. How modern. Perhaps she's texting the manager? Or calling housekeeping?" Soft, obedient laughter followed, thin and nervous. Naomi didn't acknowledge it. She didn't need to. She slid her thumb across the screen, lifting the phone slowly to her ear. Charles watched her now, not with irritation, but with something new. Something he hadn't felt in years. Fear. Who could she possibly be calling? Preston muttered. Naomi inhaled lightly, her voice steady as steel polished to a mirror. "Alex," she said, "this is Naomi." Across the table, Veronica frowned. Naomi continued. "Proceed with my directive." A quiet pause on the other end. "Yes, Madam Cole. Just confirm, shall we release the authorization package to Stanfield Global as scheduled?" The words authorization package and Stanfield Global struck the table like a silent bomb. Guests at surrounding tables stiffened, some instinctively leaning closer. Charles swallowed hard, the color draining from his face. Naomi's next sentence didn't merely break the room. It reset its entire axis. "Cancel everything," she said. "Effective immediately." The server gasped. A woman across the table dropped her fork. Someone at a nearby table whispered, "What just happened?" Veronica blinked rapidly. "Excuse me? What did you just?" Naomi ended the call. "No dramatics. No threats. Just a clean severing of a $9 billion lifeline. The kind that destroys empires. Charles lurched forward in his chair. You can't mean that. Who are you calling? Why would you? Naomi didn't look at him. Her gaze swept the ballroom instead, tracing the soft glow of chandeliers, the frozen faces, the breathless stillness of people who'd suddenly realized the room had belonged to the wrong family all along. I warned you, Charles whispered hoarsely, this deal is crucial. This isn't a joke, young lady. You don't understand. Naomi finally met his eyes. And the look she gave him, the calm, controlled, devastating quiet, made every apology he might have offered crumble in his throat. You should have chosen dignity, she said softly. Then she rose. The weight of her presence lifted from the table like the beginning of a storm breaking open. Not with thunder. Not with rain. But with inevitability. Because the moment Naomi Cole said those two words, cancel everything, the Stanfield empire began to fall. The collapse didn't arrive with shouting or chaos. It arrived with precision. Before Veronica could fully process what Naomi had just done, three individuals in tailored charcoal suits entered the ballroom, quiet, confident, and unmistakably out of place among the sequins and champagne. They moved with the coordinated calm of people accustomed to solving billion-dollar problems before lunch. Naomi's legal team. They didn't look at her for instruction. They already had it. The first, a woman with silver-rimmed glasses, approached Charles Stanfield and extended a tablet. Mr. Stanfield, per the withdrawal of the Cole Meridian authorization, these are the formal notices of termination. Charles stared at the screen like it was written in another language. What termination? He choked. This is impossible. You can't withdraw funding without. You violated conduct clauses tied to the agreement, the lawyer replied, voice steady. Cause has been established. Effective immediately, all negotiations are null, void, and permanently closed. Gasps flickered across nearby tables. The second attorney stepped forward, addressing Veronica with the sterile politeness of a surgeon preparing to amputate. Mrs. Stanfield, please be advised that Cole Meridian has dissolved all pending hospitality and logistics contracts with Stanfield Global. Notification has been sent to your board. Veronica's jaw dropped. Contracts? What contracts? Charles, what is he talking about? The third member of the team approached Naomi directly. Madam Cole, all account freezes and credit recalls have begun processing. Estimated completion, 90 minutes. 90 minutes. That was all it would take for the Stanfield empire to choke. Charles surged to his feet. Account freezes? Recalls? You can't freeze assets just because my wife offended. This is extortion. The attorney didn't blink. Sir, the freezes are based on breach of good faith terms. And as of 5 minutes ago, 3 of your lenders have already withdrawn exposure in anticipation of Cole Meridian's exit. The color drained from Charles's face faster than spilled wine. Veronica turned slowly, horror unspooling in her eyes. Charles, what is he saying? How much of our financing depends on? All of it, he whispered. A murmur swept the ballroom, phones lighting up as guests checked news alerts already spreading like wildfire. Stanfield Global facing liquidity crisis after Cole Meridian withdrawal. Billion-dollar deal collapses mid-gala. Market prepares for freefall. The quartet in the corner lowered their instruments. The servers froze mid-pour. Even the chandeliers seemed to dim. Naomi didn't watch the chaos. She didn't need to. Power wasn't about spectacle. It was about consequence. And as her legal team stepped back in precise formation, awaiting her next command, the truth settled over the room like cold smoke. The Stanfields hadn't just offended the wrong woman. They had offended the one woman whose signature kept their empire standing. And Naomi had just removed it. News doesn't walk. It runs, especially when wealth bleeds. Within minutes, the ballroom's polished serenity dissolved into a digital storm. Phones lit up across the room like a constellation blinking awake, each screen reflecting the same shocking headlines spreading at lightning speed. Cole Meridian withdraws $9 billion deal, Stanfield Global in freefall. Market panic expected as liquidity risks surface. Is this the end of a dynasty? Guests who had laughed earlier now went pale, clutching their glasses as whispers swelled into frantic murmurs. Some backed away from the Stanfields' table altogether, slowly at first, then decisively, as if proximity alone could contaminate reputations. A senator's wife muttered, "If Cole Meridian is pulling out, this isn't a scandal. This is extinction." Near the doors, a cluster of CEOs huddled around the phone. Their credit lines just collapsed, one whispered. 3 banks already flagged them. Another shook his head. With Cole gone, the market will circle like sharks. At the bar, the bartender refreshed his feed, eyes widening at every new update. Holy, Stanfield stock just halted trading. Servers exchanged glances, stepping back from the family they'd been pouring vintage champagne for minutes earlier. Veronica finally found her voice, a brittle, shaking thing. "Charles, tell them this is a misunderstanding. Tell them it's temporary. Tell them." But Charles wasn't listening. He was staring at his own phone, watching the empire he inherited crumble line by line. Lender A, exposure withdrawn. Lender B, accounts frozen pending review. Lender C, emergency board meeting triggered. His breath hitched. "It's over," he whispered. "Dear God, it's over." Across the room, Preston tried and failed to laugh it off. "Mom, Dad, come on, this is just a PR mess, right? Right?" But even he could hear the alarm screaming through his feed. Stanfield Global wasn't trending. It was plummeting. The quartet packed their instruments. The caterers slowly retreated from the main floor. 2 reporters who had been covering the gala quietly slipped out to file breaking stories. And floating above the panic, a single truth settled over the ballroom. Everyone saw it. Everyone recorded it. Everyone understood what they had just witnessed. A dynasty collapsing not in a boardroom. Not in a courthouse. But in real time, under crystal chandeliers. Because a woman they mocked refused to bow. Naomi stood still amid the unraveling chaos, her presence unchanged, steady, composed, the eye of a financial hurricane tearing through generations of inherited power. A guest near the back whispered what many were already thinking. She didn't raise her voice. But she brought the entire market to its knees. And the night was far from over. The ballroom had become a carcass of its former elegance, still glittering, still perfumed, still draped in wealth, but hollowed out by fear. Conversations died mid-sentence. People who once hovered near the Stanfields now drifted away as if the family were radioactive. And in the center of that widening circle stood Naomi Cole. Not triumphant. Not angry. Simply present. A presence that felt like judgment wrapped in silk. Charles Stanfield stumbled around the table toward her, desperation replacing the authority he'd worn like a second skin. "Miss Cole, Naomi, please, wait." His voice cracked. We made a mistake. My wife, she didn't understand who you were. Naomi lifted her eyes, slow and controlled, the movement alone able to freeze what remained of the evening. That, she said softly, was the point. Veronica shoved past him, mascara smudging, her confidence unraveling thread by thread. You can't destroy us over a misunderstanding. If you'd said something, if you'd explained. Naomi's brows lowered a fraction. Explain what? Veronica faltered. For the first time that night, she seemed genuinely unsure. Naomi stepped toward her, not aggressively, not theatrically, but with the steady inevitability of truth approaching someone who's run out of places to hide. You saw a black woman at your table, Naomi said quietly. And you decided she didn't belong. You didn't ask who I was. You didn't speak to me. You didn't show basic human decency. Her voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. The room leaned in, a collective breath held against marble walls. Charles swallowed hard. We would have treated you differently if we'd known. Naomi cut him off with a look so precise it could cleave glass. You knew I was a human being, she said, her tone low, even, devastating. That should have been enough. A stunned silence washed across the ballroom, colder than the air conditioning that hummed overhead. Veronica's lips trembled. We're sorry. Naomi nodded once, a gesture without warmth or cruelty, just acknowledgement. Dignity isn't conditional, she replied. But respect has consequences. Behind her, the chandeliers flickered, catching the glitter in her dress like embers rising from a fire she hadn't needed to ignite with anything but truth. Charles reached out helplessly. If you reverse the cancellations, if you give us time, we can fix this. No, Naomi said simply. And the word fell like the final stone in a collapsing cathedral. She turned away from them, her steps calm, unhurried, every movement a reminder that power didn't walk with haste. It walked with certainty. As she crossed the ballroom, guests parted instinctively, not out of fear, but out of reverence for a woman who had rewritten the hierarchy of the room without raising her voice. Someone whispered. She didn't just take their deal. She took their illusion. And they were right. Because tonight, Naomi Cole hadn't sought revenge. She had delivered clarity. And for the Stanfields, clarity was the most expensive thing they had ever purchased. Morning arrived like a verdict. The Ritz-Carlton ballroom, once radiant with wealth and pretense, now sat silent, its floors still bearing the echoes of a dynasty unraveling in real time. But outside those polished doors, the collapse had matured into something irreversible. By sunrise, the financial networks blazed with updates every 5 minutes. Stanfield Global stock down 72% pre-market. Lenders call in outstanding debts. Board members resigning in cascade. Federal regulators demand emergency disclosures. The world didn't simply watch the fall. It studied it like a case study in arrogance. Inside their penthouse, Charles and Veronica sat amid half-packed suitcases and unpaid invoices. The empire they inherited, the name they weaponized, had reduced itself to headlines printed in red ink. Their lawyers no longer answered calls. Their PR team issued a statement that read more like an obituary. And all because they couldn't recognize dignity when it sat 3 feet away. But while their world contracted, Naomi Cole's expanded. By 9 a.m., she walked through the quiet lobby of Cole Meridian's headquarters, glass towers rising like clarity forged in steel. Her team awaited her, composed and confident, already sorting through the ripple effects of the previous night. Market response, she asked. Strong, her CFO replied. Investors are calling your decision a precedent for ethical leadership. Good, Naomi said. Then let's make it mean something. Because for her, the purpose had never been spectacle. It was correction. And correction demanded reinvestment. Hours later, she stood on the rooftop of the same building her grandmother once cleaned as a janitor, staring out across a city that had finally learned her name. She signed a new directive reallocating the $9 billion once reserved for the Stanfield deal. The funds would now seed a nationwide initiative. Equity investments for minority-owned infrastructure startups, scholarship endowments, land development grants for underserved communities. Not revenge. Redistribution. Not punishment. Restoration. Not noise. Legacy. Below, the city hummed, unaware that a shift had been set in motion by a single, quiet refusal to tolerate disrespect. As Naomi closed her leather portfolio, her assistant approached. "Ma'am, one last item." Veronica Stanfield requested a private meeting. Naomi paused only a second before shaking her head. "No meetings," she said softly. "Some lessons only hold their value when they're not undone." Her driver opened the door to the waiting car. Naomi stepped inside, her reflection catching briefly in the tinted glass, a woman not defined by the power she wielded, but by the boundaries she would never again allow anyone to cross. As the car pulled away, a line from her grandmother surfaced, steady and warm. "Dignity isn't a crown, baby. It's a compass." And last night, Naomi Cole had followed it. Straight through a billion-dollar empire. And beyond it, into a future built not on dominance, but on justice delivered with quiet, unshakable grace.